Tommy Reynolds was a poor rancher living on the edge of the Arizona desert. His ranch was small, with a few cows, some horses, and a house that had seen better days. Life had never been easy for Tommy. He had lost his wife when he was young, and he had no children of his own. Most days were filled with hard work, fixing fences, feeding the cattle, and trying to make the land produce enough to survive. Despite his struggles, Tommy had a kind heart. He believed in helping those in need, even when he himself had very little. One late afternoon, as Tommy was returning from the distant pastures, he noticed 3 small figures near the dry creek bed. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in gold and orange. The figures were boys, dirty, hungry, and clearly lost. They were talking quietly, in a language Tommy did not understand, but their fear was obvious. Tommy approached slowly, calling out gently, "Hey there, are you okay?" The boys looked up, startled. The youngest, barely 6 years old, clung to the middle boy's hand. The eldest, around 10, stepped forward, his face cautious but proud. They seemed wary of him at first, and Tommy could see the mistrust in their eyes. Still, he did not turn away. He spoke softly and offered them some bread he had in his pocket. Slowly, the boys accepted it. Tommy soon learned that the boys were Apache brothers. Their names were Kai, Tay, and Mato. They had lost their parents in a flood that destroyed their small village near the river. The boys had wandered for days, trying to survive on what little food they could find. When Tommy heard their story, his heart ached. He knew life in the desert was already difficult for him. And yet, here were 3 children who had lost everything. He could not leave them alone. At first, the neighbors were skeptical when Tommy decided to take the boys to his ranch. "Tommy, you can barely feed yourself," one neighbor said. "Why are you taking those kids in?" Some whispered behind his back, questioning whether raising 3 Apache boys in a mostly white town would even work. But Tommy ignored the doubts. He believed that everyone deserved a chance, and he saw the potential in these children. The boys had never lived on a ranch before. At first, they were afraid of the animals, especially the horses, which towered over them. They were also unused to the hard work that ranch life demanded. But Tommy was patient. He taught them how to feed the cows, mend the fences, and ride the horses. He showed them how to survive in the desert, how to find water, and how to respect the land that gave them life. Slowly, the boys adapted. They were quick learners, and their intelligence and courage surprised Tommy. Life was still hard. There were days when the food ran low, and the boys went to bed hungry. There were times when the ranch could barely pay its own bills. But despite the struggles, the boys began to thrive. They helped Tommy with the chores, learning the value of hard work and responsibility. They laughed together in the evenings, telling stories and sharing dreams about the future. Tommy realized that he had gained something he had never had before: a family. School was another challenge. The boys were often treated differently by their classmates. Some children mocked them for being Apache, calling them names and excluding them from games. There were teachers who did not understand their culture and the struggles they had faced. But Tommy encouraged them to be proud of who they were. "Your heritage is something to honor," he would say. "It makes you strong. Never let anyone make you feel less than who you are." As they grew older, the boys began to shine. Kai, the eldest, was strong and courageous. He was a natural leader, always looking out for his younger brothers. Teye, the middle child, was clever and thoughtful. He could solve problems quickly and often helped Tommy with ideas for the ranch. Mato, the youngest, was kind and sensitive. He noticed details that others missed and always tried to help anyone in need. Together, they became a team, each supporting the other, just like a true family. The small community around the ranch began to notice the change. People who had once doubted Tommy's decision started to admire the boys. They saw how well-mannered and hard-working the children had become. The boys' reputation grew, and even though some prejudice still existed, many people began to respect them for their skills, intelligence, and courage. There were moments of adventure, too. The boys loved exploring the desert with Tommy. They would ride the horses across the plains, climb the rocky hills, and learn the secrets of the desert plants and animals. Tommy taught them how to track animals, identify edible plants, and survive even when water was scarce. The boys laughed and competed, seeing who could run faster, climb higher, or spot an animal first. These moments created memories that would last a lifetime. Despite the happiness, life was never without challenges. There were times when illness struck, and the boys would fall sick from the harsh desert weather or from minor accidents. Tommy stayed awake through the nights, nursing them back to health. He would worry about every cough and fever, but he never showed his fear. He wanted them to feel safe and loved. In those quiet, hard nights, a strong bond formed between them, a bond stronger than blood. By the time the boys became teenagers, they were respected young men in the town. They continued to help Tommy on the ranch, often taking on responsibilities beyond their years. People admired how they balanced hard work with kindness, and how they never forgot their heritage despite the many challenges they had faced. The small ranch, which once struggled to survive, now thrived under their combined efforts. Tommy often reflected on how life had changed. When he first found the boys, he had very little hope for the future, even for himself, but raising them had given him a purpose and a sense of joy he had never known. The boys had grown into strong, capable, and compassionate young men. And in return, they had given him love, laughter, and pride. The story of Tommy Reynolds and the three Apache brothers became known in the region. It was a tale of kindness, courage, and resilience. People would talk about the poor rancher who took in 3 orphaned boys and changed their lives forever. And more than that, they would talk about the boys themselves, who had faced loss, hardship, and discrimination, and yet grew up to be remarkable young men, ready to make their mark on the world. Through hard work, patience, and love, Tommy had built a family that went beyond blood. He had given the boys a home, and in return, they had given him hope, happiness, and purpose. The desert, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with laughter, life, and dreams. And although the future was still uncertain, one thing was clear. These 3 brothers, raised by a poor rancher, were destined for a life of courage and kindness that would touch many hearts in the years to come. Years passed, and the 3 Apache brothers grew into men. Kai, Taye, and Mato had become strong, confident, and skilled in many ways. The ranch that had once struggled was now thriving under their care. But it was Mato, the youngest, who showed a different kind of strength, a strength of heart and mind. While Kai and Tai focused on managing the ranch and expanding their business, Mato had a dream that would take him far beyond the desert plains he had grown up on. Mato had always been curious and observant. Even as a boy, he noticed small details others missed and cared deeply about fairness. When he became a teenager, he realized he wanted to help people in a bigger way. He wanted to fight for justice and make sure that people who were innocent were protected. Inspired by the guidance of Tommy Reynolds and the hardships he had seen in his life, Mato decided to study law. With the support of his brothers, Mato left the ranch to attend university. It was a challenging journey. The city was big and unfamiliar, and sometimes he felt out of place. But he never forgot the lessons from the ranch: hard work, patience, and compassion. Mato spent long nights studying, learning about the law, and preparing to make a difference. He was determined to help people who had no one else to fight for them. After years of study, Mato became a lawyer. He specialized in defending people who had been wrongly accused. His reputation grew quickly, and people admired not only his intelligence, but also his dedication and honesty. Mato never took a case for money alone. He took cases because he believed in doing what was right, even when the odds were against him. One hot summer day, Mato received a call that would test everything he had learned. A man named Luis had been sentenced to death for a crime he did not commit. The evidence against him was weak, and witnesses had given conflicting statements. But the legal system had moved quickly, and the execution was scheduled within days. Luis had no family who could fight for him. When Mato heard the story, he knew he could not turn away. He felt the same responsibility he had felt when caring for his brothers as a child, to protect the innocent and give hope when it seemed impossible. Mato immediately began to investigate. He went to the town where the crime had taken place, interviewing witnesses, examining records, and searching for any overlooked details. It was exhausting work. Many people doubted his efforts, saying the case was too late, that the law could not be changed. But Mato refused to give up. He remembered the lessons from Tommy Reynolds. Never abandon someone in need, and always fight with patience and care. Hours turned into days as Mato pieced together the truth. He discovered that a key witness had been pressured to give false testimony, and that crucial evidence had been ignored by the investigators. Mato worked tirelessly, gathering affidavits and proof that could change the course of the case. He barely slept, eating only when necessary, driven by the thought of saving a man's life. Finally, with all the evidence collected, Mato presented his findings to the court. He spoke with calm authority, showing clearly that Luis had been wrongly accused. He explained how mistakes had been made, how evidence had been mishandled, and how the real events had been overlooked. The judge listened carefully, and for the first time, many in the courtroom began to realize that an innocent life was at stake. The decision came just hours before the scheduled execution. The judge, recognizing the seriousness of the new evidence, halted the execution immediately. Luis was saved. Tears filled his eyes as he hugged Mato, overwhelmed by gratitude. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope, and he could see that justice, though delayed, had not been denied. Mato left the courthouse exhausted but filled with a deep sense of fulfillment. He had fought for what was right, and it had made a difference. News of the case spread quickly, and many people admired Mato's dedication and courage. The town that had once doubted him now celebrated the man who had saved a life through determination and compassion. After the trial, Mato returned to the ranch to visit his brothers and Tommy Reynolds, who was now older but still full of pride and kindness. The ranch had not changed much, still filled with the sounds of cattle, horses, and the laughter of the family that had grown there. Mato's brothers greeted him warmly, proud of what he had accomplished. Tommy, with tears in his eyes, hugged Mato tightly. "I always knew you were meant for great things," he said softly. The three brothers spent the evening together, sharing stories of the past and reflecting on how far they had come. They remembered the days when they were children, hungry and afraid, learning the ways of the ranch and the lessons of life from Tommy. They realized that the love and guidance they had received had shaped not only who they were but also the difference they could make in the world. Mato knew that his journey was far from over. There would be more people in need, more cases of injustice to fight. But he also knew that he could face any challenge because of the foundation he had received from his family and the lessons learned on the ranch. Courage, kindness, and perseverance were not just words, they were a way of life. The story of Mato and his brothers became an example for others. It showed how love and guidance could change lives, and how one person's dedication could save another from tragedy. The small ranch in the Arizona desert, which had once seemed insignificant, had raised a man who could impact lives far beyond its fences. And it all began with a poor rancher who chose to care for 3 orphaned boys when no one else would. Years later, when people told the story, they did not just talk about Motto saving a life, they talked about the power of compassion, the strength of family, and the long-reaching effects of kindness. The story inspired many to believe that even in the toughest circumstances, one could make a difference. Motto often returned to the desert, walking through the fields and pastures where he had grown up. He would ride the horses, tend to the land, and remember the boy who had once wandered, lost, and afraid. And he knew, deep in his heart, that Tommy Reynolds, Kai, and Tay had given him more than a childhood. They had given him the courage and values that allowed him to save a life and inspire others. In the end, it was not only about preventing an execution. It was about the legacy of love, care, and perseverance that started with a poor rancher taking in 3 Apache brothers. That legacy had rippled through time, touching lives, changing destinies, and proving that even small acts of kindness could grow into something extraordinary.